What's going on, everyone? Okay, full transparency. I don't know if I can follow up as cool as a bus on wheels where you get to work remotely, but I will do my absolute best. So for those who probably don't know me, my name is Tyler. I am the host of the Unleashing DePIN podcast. And so DePIN is something that's fairly near and dear to my heart. I've been in this space since about 2017, started working in decentralized identity. I work now at a company called Threnum, which is sort of DePIN adjacent. All that to say, I was very jaded coming into what is now considered DePIN as a result of the ICO craze, DeFi summer, NFTs, you name it. So hopefully that'll set the stage for what I'm talking about is something I actually do believe in quite wholeheartedly. But I'd love to start with a question, which is, who has heard this statement before? We are trying to onboard the next billion users into Web3. Have you heard that? We've all heard that. Okay. So I have a thesis. I think that DePIN will be the catalyst for driving the next billion users into Web3. And so what I want to talk about today are three topics. First of all, the value of DePIN, why I think the model is so prime for onboarding a billion users into the space. And then I want to go through three real-world use cases or case studies, if you will, for projects that are actually growing really fast and doing some interesting stuff in the space. So I'll start with what the heck is DePIN anyway? Our friend Sammy, who's over at Masari, actually coined the term. We were kind of rolling around with different names, but we landed on what is called DePIN now, and that is Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. And so there are quite a few different implementations of this DePIN model in different areas. Where I started off was wireless. That was what interested me the most. If you're familiar with projects like Helium, that's sort of dominated the narrative in the wireless space. But then there's been other projects like Filecoin, Siacoin, et cetera, et cetera. And so DePIN spans far greater than just wireless. There's a lot of interesting sectors, if you will, that are very receptive to this type of DePIN model. And so what makes DePIN interesting is this, what I call the DePIN flywheel. Actually, I didn't coin this term, but this is sort of what we've come to call. And so it sort of revolves around this concept of users, individual contributors, deploying hardware, physical infrastructure, who are then compensated in a network token. And then it sort of drives this flywheel effect where you've got the demand side because you can actually incentivize deployments, but then you also can solve the supply side by bringing in users who can then be compensated in the network token as well. And so for those who maybe go back to the 2017, 2018 days, if you remember Chris Bernensky had his famous MV equals PQ model. I'm going to be honest with you, I went to school for finance and I couldn't fully wrap my head around how that was going to translate in some of these real world applications, but we're seeing that take place in DePIN in real time, which is really kind of exciting. And so speaking of SIA, which is one of the sort of the decentralized the decentralized storage projects that predated this DePIN term. Their founder is doing another project in the space, and his name's David. And one of the things that he said on our podcast a couple weeks ago was, owning a token binds people together in a way that owning stock or donating to a charity doesn't. And so tokens have this really fascinating way of building community in ways that you just don't get through other kinds of mediums. And so you can leverage that within these decentralized physical infrastructure networks to satisfy both the supply and the demand side in kind of a new and novel way. And so some of those really unique value props that are specific to DePIN is that it solves the cold start problem first and foremost. You're able to actually get users on both the supply and the demand side by compensating them or sort of incentivizing them, if you will, with this network token. The other thing is that it allows you to scale faster than ever. And some of the use cases that I'm going to talk about today really showcase the scalability that's sort of made possible by this DePIN narrative that wasn't with their Web 2 counterparts or sort of competitors. It allows you to deploy hardware at scale dramatically faster while not even considering the ridiculous amounts of CapEx. If you're looking at things like wireless projects, companies like Verizon, AT&T, they spend billions of dollars trying to deploy hardware. And the reality is the DePIN model enables that to happen so much faster and in a medium that actually captures value to those deployers. And the other thing is that it democratizes value. And so users that are on the supply side, they're using the network, they're actually able to get what would otherwise be something that sort of flows to the top, where Verizon and AT&T, for example, they really take everything, they monetize the heck out of the network, and if you're not one of those big three telcos, for example, you're sort of out of luck. And so these four unique value props really enable DePIN to do things that you can't do in the Web 2 space in just a fascinating way. So said another way, DePIN-powered networks sort of create this competitive advantage that becomes benefits to users who don't necessarily care about Web3. And so one of the things that I think is so exciting about this space is that it can get users in, interfacing with things that they otherwise would on a day-to-day basis, and sort of exchange that value with them, and they can accrue that, and you just don't get that in the legacy space. So I want to walk through 3 case studies of projects that are deploying the DePIN model, scaling super quickly, and getting quite a bit of success. So the first one's Helium. If you've been in crypto for a while, you've probably heard about Helium. They started off by deploying what was called a LoRaWAN network, which is sort of this high range, sort of low throughput network that can be leveraged for things like IoT sensors and a bunch of different use cases. But specifically, in the last year or so, they rolled out what's called Helium Mobile. And Helium Mobile is a wireless network that's powered by the people. And so I want to start with this screenshot from Amir, who's the CEO of Nova Labs, which is sort of the company behind Helium Mobile. Don't quote me on this. I'm fairly certain they've scaled their mobile subscriber base faster than any wireless project in history. They've onboarded now 50,000 subscribers as of a few days ago, which is pretty incredible. And so the Helium model works like this. They sell hotspots to folks like us. You plug those hotspots in. I won't bore you with some of the technical details about the types of network bandwidth that they're providing, but the deployers who are actually out there providing this physical infrastructure get compensated in a speculative network token for for providing that. And then off of that, they sell phone plans to regular subscribers who can actually roam and access these networks without even skipping a beat. From there, users who are actually participating in this ecosystem can do what's called mapping. And functionally what they can do is they can use their phone just the way it's already working and provide valuable data back to Helium Mobile saying, this place doesn't have good coverage, this place has sufficient coverage. And when they can actually get compensated in the network token that they can then use to be able to buy more data on the network, they can actually use to pay for their phone plans. And what it allows Helium Mobile to do is they can optimize its scales faster than ever seen before, because they can take that real-time data and say, we don't have coverage here that's sufficient. We've got a lot of high footfall traffic, and we need to incentivize that. And so they can actually roll out boosted coverage zones so that deployers get more network token. And so the cycle sort of, it just continues as they grow and grow and grow. And so in addition to providing a network model that's quite scalable, they're also building a better mousetrap. So I don't know if this affected anybody in the last 24 hours or so, but if you're an AT&T customer, you maybe know that your cell phone service went down. I won't speculate on why that was. I don't think any of us quite know yet. But these decentralized networks, in addition to being so valuable from their scalability and their deployment strategy, they're actually pretty robust, and they're immune to some of these problems that centralized systems are plagued by. And so if you were a Helium Mobile customer yesterday, you likely did not experience the outage that some of the AT&T customers did. So I use this example as you never forget your first. So my fiance couldn't care less about crypto. She's never owned crypto, never really planned on owning crypto. But she signed up for Helium Mobile's plan because their offer to customers in certain areas is as low as $5 a month. And so for her, it's just basic math. I need a phone plan, and I don't want to pay the $70 that she was paying before at T-Mobile. So she signed up for Helium Mobile, and as a part of that was able to opt into the mapping. And so now she's a customer of the network, and she's actually getting compensated in crypto in a way that she probably would never have been had it not been for this DePIN model. So now all of a sudden you've got who I'd like to call our regular Web2 customers who don't care, they don't know, but now she's actually getting crypto, she's involved in the ecosystem, and then she can use that to pay her plan off, which I think is so incredible, because now all of a sudden we talk about onboarding these users into Web3, you're giving them the value propositions without all the cumbersome user experience problems, and it's really a value exchange and something that they're already familiar with, and you need a mobile plan still. So that's the first one that I want to talk about. The second one is a really interesting company that I got to have on the podcast called Silencio, and so they're doing something that I wasn't aware of beforehand, which is noise pollution mapping. Another thing I didn't know, it's a big problem. There is about $100 billion in sort of costs, whether you think about it from a hotel or a restaurant, that's sort of associated with this noise pollution. And so their model is so brilliant, and it uses DePIN to power this, which is users download an app, They use the microphone on their device to be able to provide noise data that Silencio can turn around and sell to companies like Expedia or companies like hotel providers or OpenTable. And then they can use that data as an exchange that flows back to the users. And so I talk about lightning fast growth that's sort of enabled with this DePIN narrative. So they were able to scale their user base to over 100,000 users in about 6 months, which is pretty good. And the other thing is that a lot of these users were first-time crypto users, right? They had never actually had a wallet. They didn't know much about crypto, but all of a sudden they think, hey, I can start earning passive income from my phone because I just download this app. I let it use the microphone. It's all secured. They don't actually track any audio or video. They're just using the decibel ratings. And in 6 months, and this is where the other power of DePIN comes into play, they were able to collect more noise data in 6 months than sort of the Web2 competitor had done in 15 years. And so when I had the founders of the project on my podcast, they said that would not be possible without DePIN. And I would fully agree with them on that. And so the last case study that I'd like to share with you is something that I also didn't know was sort of a business case or a problem, and it's a company called Wingbits, and what they're providing is community-powered flight tracking. So what's interesting about flight tracking is that it's very regulated, but it's sort of this community-driven thing where people that are pilots or they're aviation enthusiasts, they actually set up these hardwares and they provide a lot of the tracking data that gets bought and used by Delta or by Boeing. Boeing is a big buyer of these flight tracking data. And so the companies that would sort of facilitate this data aggregation would actually allow people who are deploying hardware to get access to it as sort of the reward for being a part of the network. But we know about rug pulls in Web3. These users got sort of rug pulled in the Web2 way. And so that company got acquired by either a private equity or a venture capital firm. I don't know the specifics. And basically, they changed the incentive model where it was no longer, all that data that they were previously having access to was no longer the case. And so with those changes, there was a dramatic disconnect from the network because a lot of users who were excited about this said, I don't want to participate because it's no longer valuable. So Wingbits came in with DePIN, and what they were able to do is in 3 months, they were able to deploy more of these stations that were tracking flight data than this Web2 company was able to do in the first 3 years of business. And that just really goes back to talk about the power of this model where you can incentivize both the demand and the supply side, and you build network participation in a way that just wasn't possible before. And so for all these reasons, I think that DePIN is going to be primed as a catalyst for onboarding billions of users into the space because they get access to something that just wasn't crypto native before, and it's solving problems that they don't have to know and or care about to be able to get access to. So I'll do my quick shill. If you're interested in learning more about DePIN projects, I've had a chance to interview a lot of the really great ones on my podcast. It's called Unleashing DePIN. These are a few that came to mind that I wanted to make sure you got a chance to take a look at. XNet, they're building basically decentralized wireless that can be roamed onto by companies like AT&T. Foam is sort of a GPS competitor. GPS is pretty inaccurate and also quite antiquated, and so they're doing some interesting things there. HiveMapper is a project that's basically creating. They're using dash cams to collect mapping. So if you think like Google Maps and some of these companies, that's done by very capital expensive and very centralized companies. And so there's a lot of them here. Peak, which is like an L1 for DePIN, is another one that came to mind. So now I've got my other show with some handles. If you want to check anything out, I'd love to do it. And I see a hand. I've got 6 minutes, so I'm happy to answer a few questions.
Test. Okay, cool. I'll stop yelling like a crazy guy. Okay, so I get the flywheel. You know, what I see though is like a lot of sell pressure, right? And we could have a reflexive spiral that the token goes down. Subsequently, they're not incentivized to run the infra, etc. Where is the buy pressure coming from to make these like net sustainable?
That's a great question. The token economic model, I think, is something that still has work to do. We've seen some big players come in, and frankly, the big players that have gotten a lot of success, you can see a lot of times where it's subsidized by lots and lots of venture capital money, and so there is definitely a balancing act. in every network model, it's a little bit different. So if you're looking at wireless, like I'll use a company like XNet, for example, they're very intentional about where their deployments go. And so the way the token model works is that companies that actually buy data, they burn it with the network token. And so if you don't have that buy-burn mechanism in place, the flywheel, to your point, will fully collapse. And so it's something that has to be very intentionally built. Companies like XNet, for example, are ones that I think are doing it right. Demo's another project that I think is quite interesting. They haven't begun to monetize on the data side. What they basically do is you get a dongle for your car, and it collects the data that you can get access to, track it in real time, and then from there, data companies that are interested in buying and leveraging that data can be able to do that. And so you need the proper buy-burn mechanisms in place. I think we're early days in terms of seeing what the right model is, because we've yet to have sort of the catastrophic collapse, like a Terra Luna style event within the space. That will happen. There's no question about it. But the reality is we definitely are in sort of early days. We're seeing that the data burn side needs to come to fruition to be able to offset some of that buy pressure that you're referencing, because it is a real thing. Any other questions? No? Cool. Well, I guess I can wrap it up a little bit early and yield some time back to everybody. So if you do get a chance, I'd love for you to take a listen to the pod. Like I said, I've got some pretty incredible founders that have come on to chat. I'm really passionate. I said I was jaded by the last 3 cycles, and this is one of those that I don't feel so jaded by. So I think there's some hope and quite a bit of opportunity here. Okay, a few more questions. Favorite episode would be the XNet one. I feel like I learned more on that podcast episode about wireless. I'm kind of a wireless geek. My day job is wireless adjacent, so that one, Rich is a fascinating individual. He ran the Google venture, the Google X, which is sort of the venture arm of Google for a while, and he did some crazy moonshot projects there, and so hearing about his learnings and expectations. The other one that I would say is the Glow episode. So that was the founder of SIA, as I mentioned, and so his lessons learned. He was in DePIN before we even called it DePIN. He's got some interesting learnings that they're applying to what they're doing. And Glow, for references, is a solar farm generation project with a carbon credit component. And so they're really trying to weed out all the BS in the carbon credits by sort of incentivizing solar farms to be deployed and pump that energy back into the grid that's, again, uses the token mechanism there. So anything else? I'll be right over here. I'd love to chat with everybody or anybody that has any further questions. What am I most bullish on that I'm not seeing built? God, that's a good question. So there's some interesting things in the privacy space that's starting to happen. I'm going to plead some ignorance on here with things like ZKs. You're starting to see conversations around how you can begin to sort of ensure the decentralization through hardware and other mechanisms. And again, I'm going to plead ignorance on, but it's one of the spaces that, because I don't know a lot about, I'm pretty interested to see what opportunities come to fruition as a result of it. So that would be one stock pick, if you want, that for a sector that I think is going to have some interesting growth. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate it. And I'll be over here if you have any questions.